The Parsha this week in outside of the land of Israel and America and other places is Parshat Nasso, which is a long one. It contains 176 sentences. However, many of those sentences are repetitions as it goes through the offerings made to dedicate the Mishkan. The title of this class is Hear, Hear. But since you can't see the title, it's Hear, 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 Here. Okay, so before we just tune out because of the vagueness of the title, let's start with the very last sentence in the Parsha. The last sentence in the Parsha has a wrinkle in it, which is very unusual. This last sentence talks about this. It's talking about the time when the Mishkan was all dedicated. It's chapter 7, sentence 89, and it's on page 772 in the Art Scroll Chumash. And it says, Ubavo Moshe el Ohel Moed. When Moshe came into the tent of meeting, Ledaber ito, to speak with God, Vayishma et hakol mi daber elav. And this is the tradition we have. It's not read midaber elav, which would mean speaking to him, but midaber elav, which we're going to have to explain. And midaber, Rashi tells us, is reflexive. It really means speaking to yourself. So hence, this is what the sentence really sounds like. Moshe would come into the tent of meeting in order to speak with God, and he would hear the voice speaking from atop the Ark of Testimony, from between the two Kruvim, Vayidaber Elav, and God spoke to him. So there's a wrinkle in this sentence, and the wrinkle is really by tradition. We have traditions how to read the words because the Torah is written without the vowels, and hence Rashi is commenting on the very unusual sense of midaber instead of midaber, which is reflexive. So the question is, what is this teaching us? And what does Rashi say? It says, Kemo midaber, like a person speaking to themselves, Kvodo shalmaila, it's protecting the honor of God. Lomar Cain, Medaber Beino Levein Atzmo, God is speaking to himself. So I found this very perplexing and very unsure as to what the import is of Rashi's comment and this unusual reading. And I want to try to explain it. And the first thing that came to my mind is a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. It's in chapter 6, Mishnah 2, and it's actually not correct to call it a Mishnah because the 6th chapter of Pirkei Avot are really braitas. It's a technicality. They weren't really included in the Mishnah, but they were left out. And it reads as follows: Omer Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was a great sage, and he was a crossover between the authors of the Mishnah and the authors of the Talmud. He lived right in that cusp. And he says every day a bat kol, a voice comes out, mehar chorev, from the Mount Sinai, umiskeret v'omeret, and it announces and it says, Oy lohem labriot, woe unto the creatures from the elbona shel Torah, the embarrassment of Torah, the fact that Torah is being shunned in the world. And then he goes on to say, whoever is not engaged in Torah study is like an alienated person. And he quotes a very harsh sentence from Proverbs chapter 11, which describes a gold ring being placed in the nose of a pig. What's going on here? So first of all, obviously the connection in my mind, there was a connection and there is a connection, is this idea that a bat kol comes out every day. Did you hear it? I didn't hear it. And he's not talking about his time. He's not talking about inside the tent of meeting like our sentence is. He's saying there's an announcement from Chorev. And the announcement basically is, whoa, pay attention to Torah. It has so much to offer you. It's like a gold ring. And when you shun it and ignore it, it would be like a person taking a precious ring that they have in their house and attaching it to one of the farm animals to wear. So I saw a comment from the Chochmo Musar, who is not a Hasidic source. And I want to read it to you. It says it doesn't mean that a sound comes out from the Mount Horeb, which is the Mount Sinai. Rather, within the heart of every Jewish person, a voice arises from within, from the source of faith and trust in the person, which Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi refers to as Horeb, as Mount Sinai. Now, you may remember we discussed in the past a comment of the Ramban, Nachmanides, that the Jewish people stood at Mount Sinai and heard God speaking to them. Then we built the tent of meeting, and it travels with us throughout history, and it becomes the temple, the first temple. It's destroyed, we rebuild it, it's the second temple, and we yearn for it to be rebuilt in the future. So, and the Ramban Nachmanides explains that it's like a portable Mount Sinai. It's always speaking to us. It's evoking within us an awareness, a sense of proximity to God, a sense that God is reaching out to us and offering us something, offering us connection, offering us meaning, a yearning to connect with us, whatever exactly you want to put it. So the Chacham Musar, who is a very down-to-earth rabbi, this is the way he conceives it, and he says there's a sentence in the Song of Songs, and I am asleep, but my heart is awake. So in other words, the notion is, oh, you don't hear it, and I don't hear it. That's because we're not tuned in. We're sleeping. And what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is telling us, we may be asleep. We may be ignoring certain voices that are speaking to us, that are calling to us, that are trying to elevate the way we live our lives. But when we do so, we're like a person who's asleep and ignoring that which within their heart and what's calling out to them and what's offering them so much. And he goes on to say, there's a depth of knowledge and connection to God. And this is what the Torah that Moshe taught to the Jewish people conveys to us. So in other words, what I would say, to clarify this, is that just as Nachmanides says that the entire time that the tent of meeting traveled with the Jewish people and ended up in Shiloh for 369 years before they built the temple, and then they built the temple, and then it was destroyed, and they built a second temple. We built a second temple. And that became a portable Mount Sinai. What this Mishnah, what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is teaching us, we have this inside of ourselves without the tent of meeting, without having to fly to Israel and cry at the Kotel, which evokes a connection within us whenever we do so. But it's there all the time. It's calling out to us. So what do I want to, and then there's other explanations. Also, the Slonimer, which is a Hasidic approach, says Hashem sends out a message. Those people who are ready to act upon it, they can hear it. Those people who are not, he quotes as a Talmudic sense, that you're not allowed to rebuke or to call someone out on something if you know they're not going to listen to you anyway. So he applies that to this concept of this Braita in Pirkei Avot in Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 6. So he says, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, to the extent that we elevate ourselves, to the extent that we motivate ourselves with all the lessons of Shavuot that we celebrated last week, with a sense of God invaded the world at Mount Sinai and spoke in words and in language to the entire Jewish people. To the extent that we do that with a readiness to follow through and to listen and to hear, we will hear this message. So, how does this apply back to Rashi explaining the word mi daber, that God is speaking to himself? What I would say here is that it's a reflection on the fact, first of all, no one could hear this voice but Moshe. And the fact that the sentence says Hakol, the voice, the rabbis interpret to mean that it was the same voice that was heard by everyone at Mount Sinai. So it's a loud enough voice. It wasn't that it was too quiet and you had to be very close or you had to be right there. It was the same booming voice, so to speak. And it wasn't even aimed at Moshe, but Moshe, because of his status of closeness to God, and because of his extreme motivation and responsibility that my job is to teach Torah to the Jewish people. So he was tuned in. So he could listen to God speaking to himself, so to speak, and bringing forth the wisdom of Torah, the inspiration of Torah, the guidance of Torah. And Moshe could hear it within the tent of meeting, because Moshe knew his job was to now come out and teach it to us, to the rest of the Jewish people forever, throughout history. We refer to Moshe today as Moshe, our teacher. So we see here a dynamic. It's a metaphysical, spiritual dynamic in the world. But we see from Ethics of the Fathers and from this unusual pronunciation of this word, midaber, that there's a constant, and there's other examples of this in rabbinic lore. And of course, I didn't write down and look up the sentence, but finally, when Elijah, the prophet, at the end of his life, after having the display of godly power in consuming the offerings and not consuming the offerings of the idolaters, but only consuming, it says, Kol dimamo daka nishma. God speaks in a quiet voice. Perhaps these two ideas fit together. It's not that it's quiet and you need hearing aids to listen to it. It's quiet in the sense that if you want to ignore it, it's here. That's the title of this class, H-E-R-E. Do we hear H-E-A-R? That depends on us. That depends on what we're tuned into, what we're motivated to accomplish in our lives. And this also, I think, could be illustrated by the analogy, that the metaphor that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi gives. It's like taking your jewelry and just throwing it out. In other words, it's there for you. I have a box of jewelry. I want to adorn myself. I wear it on special occasions. But if I shun it, and if it becomes meaningless to me, I throw it in the pig pen and it ends up in the nose of one of the animals there, because that's the way I value it. But if I value it properly, it ends up being polished and worn with pride and utilized in a good way. And I just want to connect this theme to other aspects of Parshat Nasso, of this long Parsha, but the class will not be longer than usual. We have the Parsha of the Nazir, the Nazarite. The Nazarite is an optional portion of the Torah. A person can fulfill the entire Torah without ever being a Nazarite. A Nazarite accepts upon oneself, a man or a woman, certain added restrictions, and they can be prompted by seeing the wayward wife in her disgrace, or they could simply be prompted, and so I want to add, by this idea of having a good grip on what their present moral standard is. What's going on internally with me? Am I listening to my spiritual self? And do I need a certain amount of added discipline? Do I need a certain amount of added withdrawal from the world? And understand something. The Torah is not looking for us to withdraw from the world. The Nazarite, when he finishes his period of being a Nazir, he has to bring an offering, a sin offering, because he deprived himself of some of the good that God built into the world. He didn't use wine or drink grape juice to make Kiddush every Friday night because he prohibited that on himself for fear of becoming intoxicated. Okay, so he had good reason to do that on a stopgap temporary level. Why? Because he could hear within himself a vulnerability that he needed to redirect and overcome. And perhaps some of us would benefit from this, and we don't practice being Nazarites today, so don't take out your copy of the Torah and declare anything this evening for yourself. But we could listen to ourselves better and realize that there are areas where, on a temporary basis, we need a program for ourselves to enhance ourselves. And of course, it would all depend on what is your motivation. What is your motivation? In a sports fan, and when you come to the end of a season and everybody looks tired and everybody looks fatigued, and there's the one guy jumping up and down and is bursting with energy. And if they win the championship, he says, this is what I anticipated right from the get-go, and that's why I did my training extra hard, and that's why I took extra responsibility on myself, and whatever else he might want to say. It's the same idea because he envisioned a championship season and he was ready to undertake everything to achieve that. And that's, I think, what we see in the Nazir. And now I want to revisit the priestly blessings, the Birchat Kohanim, which are also in here. It comes um, right after the Nazarite, and it is on page 762. It's chapter 6. And I think we've heard it many times. We'll read the text. It says, Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, page 763 in the Stone Chumash, so shall you bless the children of Israel, saying to them, may Hashem bless you and safeguard you. May Hashem illuminate his countenance for you and be gracious to you. May Hashem lift his countenance upon you and establish peace for you. And then it concludes, they don't say this, let them place my name upon the children of Israel, and I shall bless them. What I just want to emphasize here is this. Do you know what the origin was of Aaron and his descendants being the representatives of God to convey God's blessing? Because it's the Samu Eshemi. They place God's name upon us. In other words, they're not blessing us, they're evoking Hashem's blessing upon us. So if you go back to Exodus chapter 4, sentences 13, 14, whole discussion at the burning bush, where Moshe is demurring at God's request to go rescue the Jewish people. And it reaches a certain point where God says to Moshe, you're worried about stepping on the honor of your brother. Your brother is coming out v'samach libo, and his heart is filled with joy. And what is explained there, the specific explanation of that sentence there, and it's in Rashi. Rashi says, it's not like you think, Moshe. God tells to Moshe, it's not that you think that, yes, he'll go along with me, God, appointing you, Moshe, to lead the Jewish people, but inside he'll feel badly. No, you're selling Aaron short. You're afraid he might be makpid, he may have a certain sense of infringement. Not true. He's purely, his heart is filled with pure joy and happiness. This is what earns, and if you think about it, it's not just this is what earns. I started to say something that I don't agree with. It's not just that this earned Aaron and his descendants the privilege of evoking Hashem's blessing. This is what makes it possible for the blessing to go through them onto us. Because, so to speak, as the blessing, because we just saw that the words of God come down from on high, they speak to Moshe from between the Kruvim, these two angelic figures that are on top of the Aron. So similar to that, the Kohanim every day are charged. In Israel, they do it every morning. In America and outside of the land of Israel, we only do it on the holidays. Their they're evoking Hashem's blessing, and the blessing goes through them. The only way it's capable of passing through them is because of the extraordinary ability that Aaron had to rise above any personal complaint or concern, and to feel as though if my brother Moshe is being appointed to be God's messenger to rescue the Jewish people, that gives me only joy, only happiness, without any conflict whatsoever. So here's the idea, because obviously, if we're looking at these channels of a voice from on high, if we're looking at this idea of Hashem speaking to himself and Moshe being able to listen in and then teach Torah to the rest of us. So we have the Kohanim who have the ability to say, I only want the best for my fellow Jews. I only want the fullness and completeness of God's blessing. And if it means that they drive a better car than I drive, or if it means that when we're studying Torah, they have a better answer for the question than I do, and I have to learn from them, whatever it means, wherever it takes us. That's what we want for our fellow Jews. That was implanted in their hearts, so to speak, because of the extraordinary sensitivity that Aaron felt. And that's why they are the people. There's a sentence in Mishlei which says, Tov ayin hu yivorech. The person who has a good eye, a generosity of spirit, give him the cup to bless others. And we actually quote this when it comes to grace after meals. Such a thing, grace after meals, if you have 3 people, some people use a cup, some people don't. We have 10, we always use a cup. We generally use a cup. But in other words, we're sitting around a table and there are 10 of us, and somebody's going to evoke God's blessing, and we're going to all thank God for the food that we ate. Who should be the leader? Tov ayin hu yivorech. Why? Why should it be a person of generosity of eye who sees things differently? Because with him leading the way, the blessings will come through. With him leading the way, we will feel the presence of Hashem and we will be ready to absorb that blessing. And again, to quote Nachmanides, this is the purpose or the goal of the mitzvah of love your neighbor as yourself. Because he says it's not humanly possible, and it's also halachically prohibited in certain circumstances to place another person ahead of yourself. Okay, if there's one measure of water and it's yours, and you're in the desert, and it's a question of if we share it, neither of us are going to live. Love your neighbor as yourself doesn't tell me, hey, I'll give it to you. I'm commanded to keep it for myself because there's an element of I need to preserve my life, which I'm capable of doing. I'm not doing it at the expense of your life, but I'm not giving up my life on your behalf. So again, you see how it becomes part and parcel, though, of the ultimate goals of the Torah. And then I don't speak Yiddish, but there's a concept in Yiddish called farginen. And farginen means for a person to have a good eye, for a person to be happy when someone else has something great. And I heard not long ago one of the Tversky rabbis who was visiting said how in Israel he would walk to services on Shabbos morning with the bells of Rav, and they were building in the neighborhood an exquisite, lavish apartment. And they would pass by, and the bells of Rav would stop and look at it. Look at all the extra features and look at all the extra installation and look at how fancily everything was being decorated and how nicely everything was being done. And 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 um, and so person asked him, said, "What are you looking at, Rebbe?" Thinking, "Oh, it's too much. It should give more money to tzedakah." None of that. He says, "I want to have a full measure of happiness on behalf of the people who are going to live in that apartment. I want to celebrate their joy when they say, look at all these features, look at the way the kitchen's designed, look at how comfortable the living room is, and look at the view we have. I want to enjoy their enjoyment with a full heart. So I'm taking it in as they're building it so that I could develop that capacity to share in their enjoyment and to do it with a whole heart and in my own way to try to mirror the level of an Aaron that merited his descendants being the ones who blessed the Jewish people. Who doesn't want to be the conveyor of blessings? Aaron, of course, is the person who's famous for being Rodev Shalom. He chased after peace. He did everything he could to create peace in the world. And he's Oevet Abriot. He loved other people. Umakarvan LaTorah. And see, here's how all the pieces in the puzzle tied together. And he saw it as his duty that through his love for others, to magnify their interest in Torah, to magnify their knowledge of Torah, their appreciation of Torah. Again, going back to this idea of there's a bas call, there's a voice within every one of us that says, "Oy, don't miss out. Don't miss out on the Torah." So Aaron, through his friendship, through his interest in solving every dispute that arose between a husband and wife or between anybody else in the Jewish people, that's what he busied himself with. And of course, the priestly blessings end. V'yasein lecho shalom. You should have peace. And the rabbis teach us peace is the container that holds all the other blessings. So if I have wealth, and if I have intelligence, and if I have a beautiful family, whatever blessing I'm enjoying, if it doesn't have the container of peace around it to hold it, it's going to slip away. It's not going to stay with me. And that's the value of what the Kohanim wish for each and every one of the Jewish people. And this is what the process is. Tune in, listen, and you have to say, listen to what is oftentimes not listened to, and don't jump to the conclusion that you're losing your mind because you may be one out of 1,000 people who hears these qualities. Because we all know when you go to a great symphonic performance and there are 3,000 people there, there's probably only a handful who really appreciate the full extent of the artistry and the mastery that's taking place and can really differentiate the quality that's taking place from all other things. We have that capacity on a spiritual level. We have the capacity ultimately to listen to God speaking to God, to eavesdrop, to listen in, and to become such a complete partner in the goals of creation and to the ultimate achievement of mankind. And if only we listen so that we can hear what's here, we have a tremendous opportunity to benefit, to grow, and to truly live extraordinary lives.